We pulled into the parking lot just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The sign for Black Hollow Nature Reserve was worn, the letters barely legible under layers of dirt and decay. No one came here anymore, which was exactly why we had chosen it, a weekend away from everything and everyone. Jake, sitting beside me in the passenger seat, pushed open his door and stepped out, stretching his arms over his head. "Finally," he said, grinning, "a whole weekend off the grid." I turned off the engine, and for a moment we all just sat there, taking in the silence. It felt strange, almost too quiet. I could feel the weight of the woods pressing down on us already. "We're really doing this," Casey said from the back seat, excitement buzzing in her voice. Her long blonde hair shimmered in the fading sunlight as she climbed out of the car and joined Jake. No phones, no parents, just us. I smiled at her, pushing away the strange sense of unease that had settled in my gut. This was supposed to be fun, a weekend of camping, drinking, and getting away from everything. I wasn't going to let my nerves ruin it. Sam and Liz were already unloading the gear from the trunk, talking about how they couldn't wait to roast marshmallows over the campfire. Ryan, always the jokester, was tossing a football in the air and muttering something about murder woods. "Don't jinx it, man," I said, trying to laugh off the weird feeling. "Last thing we need is you summoning some backwoods serial killer with your mouth." He just smirked and threw the ball in my direction. I caught it, but I couldn't help glancing around at the dense forest. The trees seemed taller here, the shadows deeper. The trail leading into the woods stretched out like a black ribbon, disappearing into the thick canopy. "We better get moving before it gets too dark," Jake said, already heading toward the trail. "Let's find the perfect spot before all the good ghosts take it." We all laughed, but it felt forced, like we were trying too hard to convince ourselves that this was just another camping trip. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the world seemed to grow quieter. The sound of the highway faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional cry of a bird in the distance. The trees grew closer together, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The sky, now a deep purple, barely peeked through the thick canopy above. After about an hour of hiking, we found a clearing big enough for our tents. The ground was flat, surrounded by towering pines that cast long, creeping shadows. We wasted no time setting up camp, gathering firewood, and pitching our tents as the last light of day disappeared completely. The fire crackled in the center of the clearing, casting flickering light on our faces. The bottle of whiskey made its way around the circle, and soon the tension from the hike began to melt away. We laughed, told stories, and made plans for the weekend. Then Ryan leaned forward, his face half lit by the fire. "You guys ever hear the story about this place?" Casey rolled her eyes. "Here we go." "No, seriously," Ryan insisted, his voice low and conspiratorial. "There's a legend about Black Hollow. They say something lives out here. Something that can look like anything or anyone." "Like a shapeshifter?" Liz asked, raising an eyebrow. "Exactly," Ryan said, grinning. "They call it the Mimic. It hides in the woods, watching, waiting. It takes the form of someone you know, someone you trust, and then it lures you away. You never see it coming." "That's enough of that," Jake said, chuckling. "We're supposed to be having fun, not scaring the shit out of each other." "Yeah, whatever," Ryan said, leaning back. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The laughter died down, replaced by the low hum of the forest around us. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant rustle of the wind in the trees. I looked around at my friends, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. But that strange feeling was back, the sensation that something was watching us, just beyond the light of the fire. I shook it off. It was just Ryan's stupid story getting to me. One by one, we retreated to our tents. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The sound of something wet and slurping woke me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the noise grew louder, more insistent, dragging me into full consciousness. I blinked, disoriented, the inside of my tent illuminated only by the weak glow of the dying fire outside. I lay there for a moment listening. There was something outside the tent, moving through the clearing, something dragging across the dirt. I swallowed hard, forcing my body to stay still as I listened more closely. It wasn't an animal. It sounded too deliberate, too close. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent, careful not to make a sound. The clearing was dark, the fire reduced to little more than glowing embers. I shone the flashlight around, searching for the source of the noise, and then I saw her. Sam. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, her back to me. She was hunched over something on the ground, her hands moving in slow, jerking motions. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "Sam?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. I took another step forward, the beam of the flashlight falling on the thing in front of her. It was an animal, at least it had been. Its body was torn open, entrails spilling out into the dirt. Sam's hands were coated in blood, her fingers digging into the flesh, pulling it apart. "Sam!" I called louder, fear creeping into my voice. She stopped moving. Slowly, she turned to face me. My flashlight caught her face, and I immediately wished I hadn't looked. Her eyes, black, hollow, like voids, stared back at me. Her mouth hung open, blood dribbling down her chin, but it wasn't the blood that terrified me. It was her expression. There was nothing behind those eyes. No recognition, no humanity, just hunger. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I sprinted through the clearing, crashing into the trees, branches tearing at my skin. Behind me, I heard her footsteps. No, not footsteps. Something faster, quieter, too fluid. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran through the woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the flashlight swinging wildly in my hand. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I pushed harder, desperate. Then I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the flashlight slipping from my grasp. Pain shot through my body as I rolled to a stop, gasping for breath. I lay there for a moment, dazed, before forcing myself to look up. There was someone standing over me. "Jake?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He knelt down, his face illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the trees. It was Jake, but something was wrong. His eyes, black, just like Sam's, were locked onto mine, unblinking. My heart stuttered. "Jake!" He smiled, but it wasn't Jake's smile. It was something cold, something empty. "Come on, we've got to get back to camp," he said, his voice too calm, too even. I scrambled backward, my hands shaking. "You're not Jake." His smile widened. "Why would you say that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body was frozen with fear as he stood, towering over me. Then he lunged. I rolled to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding his grasp. I scrambled to my feet, running blindly through the trees, my mind racing. I had to get back to the others. I had to warn them. But deep down, I knew it was too late. I tore through the trees, the sounds of Jake, or whatever he was, fading behind me. My mind was racing, my body trembling as I stumbled through the dark, trying to find my way back to camp. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, they would catch me. I could hear something moving behind me, crashing through the underbrush with impossible speed. My heart was in my throat, my pulse thundering in my ears as I forced myself to run faster, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the sharp pain in my side. I had to get out of here. I had to find the others. The clearing came into view, the remnants of the campfire casting faint light across the tents. I burst into the open, gasping for breath. "Guys!" I shouted, my voice cracking. Wake up! Something's out there! But when I looked around, I realized with horror that the tents were already empty. The fire was out, and the campsite was eerily still. Number Y stumbled forward, calling their names, Casey, Ryan, Liz. But there was no answer. The tents had been slashed open from the outside, their contents strewn across the ground. I searched the clearing, panic rising in my chest, but there was no sign of them. They were gone. A branch snapped behind me. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. Jake stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me, his head cocked to one side. But it wasn't just Jake. The others were with him. Casey, Ryan, Sam, Liz. They all stood there, their faces blank, their eyes black as night. My knees went weak. They took a step forward, moving in unison. "You can't run forever," Jake said, his voice low and calm. "You belong to the woods now." I took a step back, shaking my head. "Number, I'm not like you." "You will be," Casey said, her voice cold and empty. "You'll join us soon." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. There had to be a way out. There had to be. I turned and ran, pushing through the trees as fast as my legs would carry me. The forest was closing in around me, the shadows growing longer, deeper. But I kept running, the sound of their footsteps growing fainter behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get out. And then, through the trees, I saw it. A light. My heart leapt in my chest. I ran toward it, my body screaming in protest. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a light. It was a road. And beyond the road, a car. I burst out of the forest and onto the pavement, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. The car's headlights were blinding in the darkness, but I didn't care. I ran toward it, waving my arms frantically. "Stop, please!" The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, an older man, rolled down his window, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice shaky. I stumbled toward him, gasping for breath. "Please, help me. There's something in the woods. My friends, they're..." But I couldn't finish the sentence. I collapsed against the side of the car, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The man quickly opened the door, helping me into the passenger seat. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said, his voice urgent. "You're bleeding." I looked down, barely noticing the cuts and bruises covering my arms and legs. I nodded weakly, my head swimming. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the forest. They were standing at the edge, watching me. Jake, Casey, Ryan, Sam, Liz. Their black eyes followed the car as it sped away, their faces twisted into grotesque, knowing smiles. But they didn't follow. The man drove in silence for a while, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I leaned back in the seat, my whole body trembling. I had escaped. I had made it out. But as we left the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't really escaped at all. The woods still had a hold on me, and I knew deep down that they always would.